My hands were holding a small navy velvet pouch when I heard the words. Behind me, my husband of 41 years stood in his charcoal suit, the one he had bought specifically for this day 6 weeks earlier, and had not stopped checking himself in the hallway mirror about. Our daughter looked at the two of us across the threshold of the bridal suite, and her voice was even and quiet and almost businesslike, the voice she used at her own work to deliver difficult news to clients. "Mom, Dad, there's been a change. You're not on the list for today. I'm sorry. It'll be cleaner this way." She had no idea that within 90 minutes, the venue she was about to walk through, the catering tent she had argued with me about for 2 months, the string ensemble tuning their instruments on the south lawn, the photographer already drinking complimentary sparkling water in the side garden, the late summer floral installations that had taken 3 women a full day to construct around the pergola, that all of it sat, in legal terms, on top of 2 signatures, and that both of those signatures were mine and her father's, and that neither of those signatures had been countersigned by anyone else. "The contracts are in our names, Margaret," Walter whispered, half a step behind me. His voice had the particular shake it had only ever had 3 times in our marriage, and one of those times had been when his mother died. I nodded once. I did not turn around. I was still looking at the face of our daughter, the face I had washed and brushed hair away from and pressed cool cloths against during fevers for 33 years. And I was trying very hard to find, anywhere on that face, the child who had once climbed into my lap during a thunderstorm and asked me whether the sky was angry at us. The child was not there. Whoever was standing in the doorway in front of me, in a heavy ivory silk gown and a sweep of dark hair pinned up in a way I had never seen her wear before, was somebody else entirely. Let me back up. Let me start at the hallway mirror, 20 minutes earlier. I had checked my reflection one final time before we left the house. My hair had cost me $80 at a salon I had never been to before, an indulgence I had argued myself into across most of the previous week. My dress was a soft slate grey 2-piece, hemmed at the knee, with a small mother-of-pearl pin at the collar. The pin had been my grandmother's. The dress had been chosen with intentional restraint, because Cassidy had told me, in one of the half-dozen wedding-related conversations we had managed across the 8 months of planning, that the palette of the day was neutral, very neutral, Mum. And I don't want anything in any of the photographs that will pull the eye. I had taken that sentence and worn it the way another woman might wear a vow. Walter had adjusted his tie 3 times. He had worn the same tie to Cassidy's college graduation 11 years earlier, and to her aunt's funeral 6 years earlier, and to the dinner the night Cassidy had told us she was engaged. He was the kind of man who owned 3 good ties and rotated them the way he rotated everything in his life. I had loved that about him for 41 years. On the hall table sat the small navy velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a thin, gold chain, and on the chain was an oval locket the size of a fingernail, with my grandmother's initials engraved on the back in a hand so old and small you almost couldn't read it. My mother had worn it on her wedding day. I had worn it on mine. I had been holding it in my hand at 3 in the morning 2 nights earlier, sitting on the edge of our bed with the bedroom light off, and I had decided that if my daughter had not chosen anything from me of her own initiative for the day, then this was the one thing I would still try to give her. Walter had watched me from the doorway that night, with the particular soft expression he gets on his face only when I am about to do something he is not going to argue with. And he had said only, "She'll like it, Maureen. I think she will." I had not been sure he was right. I had taken the locket anyway. Hope is a stubborn animal. The venue, I should tell you, was on the grounds of an old country club 30 miles north of our town. A long, rolling expanse of lawn and oak trees with a small white pergola at the end of a flagstone walkway and a renovated stable block behind it that had been turned into an event space with chandeliers hung from the original beams. Walter and I had not chosen it. Cassidy had chosen it. We had paid for it. We had paid for almost all of it. The total, by the time the final invoices had come in the week of the wedding, was $46,000, of which $38,000 had come directly out of Walter's deferred retirement account. He had set the account up the year I turned 45 and had not touched it for 27 years. He had touched it now to give our daughter what she had described over a single long phone call in March as the kind of wedding I'm not going to be embarrassed about later, Dad. The phrase had bothered me at the time. I had told myself I was being sensitive. I had told myself for a great many years that I was being sensitive. We pulled into the long curving drive of the country club at 1:20 in the afternoon. The ceremony was scheduled for 3. We had arrived early, deliberately. I had wanted to see Cassidy before the chaos. I had wanted to give her the locket in a quiet moment, mother to daughter, with nobody in the room. A young woman in a black dress and a clipboard waved us into the visitor parking lot, and as we got out of the car, she came over to us with the brittle professional warmth of an events coordinator at the last minute of a long week. "You're the Brennan Walsh family, aren't you? The bride's parents?" Walter said yes. The young woman's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I caught it. 28 years of teaching middle school English had given me a permanent radar for the half second when a person's face decides to lie. She said, "The bride asked me to bring you to her as soon as you arrived. She's in the bridal suite. Come this way." I should have heard it then. I think, looking back, that some part of me did. The bridal suite was on the second floor of the stable block, a long converted hayloft with a vaulted ceiling and one wall of leaded windows looking out across the lawn toward the pergola. The young woman knocked. She did not announce us by name. She said only, "Cassidy, they're here." There was a pause. There was a small flurry of movement on the other side of the door. 3 women's voices, low and muttering. Then a small laugh I did not recognize. And then the door opened, just enough, and our daughter stood in front of us in a heavy ivory silk gown I had never seen before. It was not the dress she had chosen with me in March at the small boutique downtown where I had cried, very quietly in the corner, while she stood on a low platform in front of 3 mirrors. That dress had been simpler, with a small lace overlay at the bodice, and it had cost $3,200, which Walter and I had paid for in 2 installments. This dress had heavy crystal beading across the entire bodice, and the train was easily twice as long as the one I had seen, and it had been altered, recently, by someone who knew how to fit a gown like that, which is to say, not by the seamstress at the boutique downtown. I noticed all of this in the space of perhaps 2 seconds. Then I looked at her face. She did not smile, not really. There was a small movement at the corner of her mouth, the kind of formal acknowledgement one gives to a clerk at a counter. She stepped out into the corridor and pulled the door of the bridal suite mostly shut behind her, so that the women inside would not be able to see, and so that we would not be able to see them either. She said, "Mom, Dad, thank you for coming all this way. I know it's a drive." Walter, who genuinely did not yet understand what was happening, said, "Cassidy, sweetheart, you look beautiful. We just wanted to see you before—" She held up her hand. The hand was wearing a thin gold tennis bracelet I had also never seen. "Dad, listen to me. There's been a change to the schedule. Trevor's family wanted a slightly different feel for the day. So you're not—" She paused, almost imperceptibly, to find the word that would land softest. She didn't find it. "You're not on the list for the ceremony or the reception. I'm sorry. We thought it was kinder to tell you here, in person, rather than have you find out at the seating." I held out the small navy pouch. I did not even consciously do it. My hand simply continued to do the thing it had been preparing to do for 48 hours. "It's the locket," I said. My voice came out perfectly level. "I thought you might want to wear it." She looked at the pouch. She did not take it. She looked at me with an expression that was neither cruel nor warm, but something colder than either. An expression of administrative completion. The way you look at someone whose ticket has been refunded. She said, "Mum, I have all the jewelry I need for today, but thank you. It's a really sweet thought." Then she said, more quietly, the sentence I will be hearing in my head when I am 85 years old. "Trevor's family has certain expectations about how the day is going to look in the photographs. And honestly, I think it's going to be cleaner this way. Please don't make a scene. We've worked really hard on this." I did not make a scene. I am not by temperament a maker of scenes. I am a 63-year-old retired English teacher who once kept 32 11-year-olds quiet during a fire drill by raising one eyebrow. I stood in the corridor in my slate grey dress, with my husband of 41 years 2 inches behind my left shoulder, and I watched our daughter perform, with admirable economy, the dismissal of her parents from a wedding her parents had paid for. The door of the bridal suite behind her opened a fraction of an inch. A face appeared in the gap, a young woman with pale blonde hair pinned the same way Cassidy's was pinned, who I would later identify as one of Trevor's 2 sisters, and the face registered our presence with a small private smile that the face's owner did not quite manage to suppress in time. The smile was the part that did it. I think I had been prepared, theoretically, for almost any reaction to what was being done to us. I had not been prepared to be a private joke. A man's voice came down the corridor behind us, and a moment later, Trevor himself walked into the frame in his tuxedo, with his hair perfectly combed and his face perfectly arranged. He is 35, 6'2", the kind of handsome that does not require a personality. He stopped beside Cassidy. He put his hand very lightly on the small of her back, in a gesture that was not affection, but a kind of territorial signature. The way you put your hand on the door of your own car. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, I'm sorry about all of this. We thought the kindest way to handle it would be in person. I really do appreciate everything you and Maureen have contributed. We'll send you photos." We'll send you photos. Walter made a small sound beside me. I did not turn to see his face. I knew I could not turn to see his face yet, because if I turned to see his face yet, I would not be able to continue standing in the corridor. I said very quietly, "Cassidy, look at me." She did, for the first time in the entire conversation. I said, "I'm going to ask you one question, and I would like you to answer it, please. Are you certain about this?" She did not pause. "Yes, Mum."
"I am,"
I said. "All right." I put the navy velvet pouch back into the inside pocket of my coat, where it had been before. I said, "Then your father and I are going to leave now. Please understand that I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. And please understand that nothing about what is about to happen in the next 2 hours is something I have chosen. It is something you have chosen. I want you to remember that." I do not know where the sentence came from. I had not prepared it. It arrived in my mouth fully formed. Walter behind me made a second sound, a slightly different sound from the first one. The events coordinator with the clipboard, who had been hovering at the end of the corridor with her face turned very politely away, suddenly remembered an emergency she needed to attend to in another part of the building. We walked down the hayloft staircase and through the lobby of the stable block. We walked past the long table of place cards arranged in alphabetical order in 3 precise rows on a piece of antique linen. I will tell you what I noticed at the place card table, because it has come to feel important. The place cards were on heavy cream stock. Our names were not among them. Not under B, not under W, not anywhere. They had been removed, deliberately, ahead of our arrival. The card for Trevor's mother was at the head table, in a position of honour on the groom's side. The card for Trevor's father was next to her. The card for me would have been opposite Trevor's mother. The card for Walter would have been opposite Trevor's father. There was nothing on the table where those two cards should have been. There was a small, empty space, like a missing tooth in a smile. Cassidy had instructed someone, possibly the same young woman with the clipboard, possibly her florist, possibly her future mother-in-law, to remove our cards before we arrived. The decision had not been made in a panic. It had been made carefully, in advance, and someone had done it that morning before the doors opened. The way you remove a name from a guest list at a restaurant when you've decided someone is no longer welcome to dine there. I stood at the place card table, and I looked at the empty space, and I understood finally that I was not standing inside an emotional misunderstanding. I was standing inside a plan. I took Walter's elbow. We walked out of the stable block across the gravel drive, past the catering staff carrying trays of canapés toward the south lawn, past the string ensemble tuning their cellos, past the great curving arch of white roses that had been built around the pergola the previous afternoon, past a young photographer with 2 cameras around his neck, who looked up at us as we passed, and whose face, for just a second, betrayed that he had been told the parents of the bride would not be in attendance, and that he was not, under any circumstances, to ask why. We walked to our car. Walter unlocked the doors. We got in. We sat in the front seats with the doors closed and the engine off for a very long time. I could see in the side mirror the catering tent being finalized in the distance. A woman in a black dress carrying a clipboard was directing 2 assistants holding clusters of dahlias. The dahlias were, I noticed, a particular dusty pink and cream variety that I had spent 45 minutes on the phone with the florist's assistant choosing in March, when Cassidy had told me she couldn't deal with the floral consult right now, Mum. Can you just handle it? I had handled it. I had paid for it. The dahlias would be on every table at her reception this evening, and she would not be sitting at any of those tables with me, and I would not be sitting at any of those tables with her, and her future mother-in-law, whom I had met exactly twice in my life, across 2 awkward dinners in 2 restaurants neither of us had chosen, would be sitting where I should have been sitting. Walter, finally, said, "Maureen, what do you want to do?" I said, "Drive somewhere, anywhere, I don't care. Just away from here." He drove. He drove down the long, curving exit road, through the wrought iron gates of the country club, out onto the secondary highway, and 4 miles down the highway, he pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner I had never seen before, in a town I could not have named. He turned off the engine. We sat. After a while, I said, "Walter, do you know what those contracts have on them?" He said, "Our names, yours and mine, on every single one of them." I said, "Yes, that's what I thought." He said, "I checked the binder last week. Every line. They never put hers on any of them. Or his." I said, "I know." I want to be clear about something here because I think it matters. I am not a vengeful woman. I had not, until that moment in the front seat of our car, in the parking lot of a diner I cannot name, ever in my life done something to hurt someone on purpose. I had spent 33 years being Cassidy's mother, and 41 years being Walter's wife, and 28 years being a public school English teacher. And across all of those years, the worst thing I could have been accused of, fairly, was a certain stubbornness about commas. I am not a vindictive person. I want you to understand that. I want you to understand that whatever happens in the rest of this story did not come from a place I had ever been before. I took out my phone. I scrolled to a folder I had created 7 months earlier, when wedding planning had begun in earnest, and Cassidy had begun forwarding me one invoice after another to be paid. The folder was labelled simply, Wedding Contracts. Inside the folder were 16 photographs, taken with the documentary thoroughness of a person who has been a teacher for nearly 3 decades and is therefore in the habit of keeping clean records of every transaction. 16 signed contracts. Catering, venue, florist, photography, videography, band, string quartet, bar service, hair and makeup vendor, 2 transportation services, wedding night accommodations for the bride and groom, honeymoon flights, honeymoon hotel, tuxedo rental for the 4 groomsmen, day of coordination. Every single one of those contracts, I will say it again, had my name on it, or Walter's name, or both. None of them had Cassidy's name. None of them had Trevor's. Cassidy and Trevor had filled out the requests. Walter and I had signed the contracts and paid the deposits. That was how, in the 8 months of planning, we had not noticed how completely we had been removed from the actual event we were funding. Cassidy had simply forwarded us paperwork to sign. We had signed it. We were that kind of parents. We had been that kind of parents for 33 years. I opened the first contract. It was the venue. The contract specified that final payment of the venue balance, $11,200, was due no later than 72 hours before the event, and that any cancellation within 72 hours of the event would result in a forfeiture of the deposit, but no further charges. Within 72 hours of the event meant within 72 hours of 3 p.m. today. The current time was 27 minutes past 1. We were inside the 72-hour window. The deposit was already lost. But the final payment had not yet cleared. I knew it had not cleared because I had personally instructed our bank 4 days earlier to hold the wire transfer pending my confirmation, because Cassidy had been so frantic about the final guest count revisions that I had wanted to be sure the contract balance and the seated head count aligned before I authorized the release. Cassidy did not know I had done this. She had assumed, the way she assumed everything across the 8 months of planning, that the money had simply moved on schedule, because the money always moved on schedule. I opened the second contract, the caterer. Same provision, final payment held by my instruction, same window, same situation. I opened the third contract, the florist, same. I opened the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. By the 10th contract, I had stopped opening them and had simply begun to understand. Across all 16 vendors, the final payments, totaling in aggregate somewhere in the region of $22,000, had not yet been released by our bank. Because I had a habit, born of nearly 4 decades of household accounting, of pausing every large outbound transaction in the 72 hours before it cleared and confirming it manually. Walter had teased me about this for years. He had called it Maureen's checkbook witchcraft. I had not stopped doing it, because I am the kind of woman I am. Walter looked over at the screen of my phone. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Maureen." I said, "Walter." He said, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking it. I haven't decided about it yet. I'm thinking it." He said, "Take your time, sweetheart. I'm not driving anywhere else for a while." I sat in the front seat of our car in the parking lot of the diner I cannot name, and I thought. I thought about 33 years of small, accumulated wounds. I thought about the high school graduation when Cassidy had sat with her boyfriend's family for the after-ceremony lunch, and Walter and I had taken our restaurant reservation by ourselves and eaten in silence with 2 empty chairs across from us. I thought about the time 6 years ago when she had been promoted at her marketing firm and had announced it at Thanksgiving dinner, not by telling us, but by handing me a business card with her new title and saying, "I figured you'd want a copy for your purse, Mum." I thought about the Christmas before her engagement, when she had spent the entire day on her phone in the corner of our living room arranging logistics for a New Year's trip she had not invited us to, and from which she had brought back no gift and no story, and during which she had not called once. I thought about the engagement dinner Walter and I had hosted at our house in October, when I had spent 2.5 days preparing every dish from scratch, including a small fig and walnut tart Cassidy had loved since she was 9, and Trevor's mother had taken one look at the table and said, "Oh, Maureen, what an effort. I admire that so much. We just have ours catered, of course, because life is too short. I thought about all of it, and I thought also about something less specific. I thought about the slow, deliberate 8-month-long performance by which our daughter had moved us from the position of parents to the position of donors. I thought about how carefully she had managed it. The dress fitting I had not been invited to in May, despite being the one who had paid for the dress. The cake tasting in June. No point in you dragging out there, Mum. I'll FaceTime you the options. The seating chart she had built without consulting me in July. The rehearsal dinner that had been moved 2 weeks ago from the small Italian restaurant downtown that Walter and I knew the owner of to a private dining room at a restaurant in the city that Trevor's father had recommended. The way the rehearsal dinner had then, 4 days ago, been scaled down to a more intimate group, with no further communication about what that meant, until I had realised 2 evenings ago that I had received no logistical information about it at all. The way she had not, in any of the 8 months of planning, once asked me how I was doing. The way she had not, in any of the 8 months of planning, once asked her father whether he was sleeping. I looked up from the phone. I said, "Walter?" He said, "Yes, sweetheart." I said, "Pull up the bank app on your phone. I want to do this together." He pulled up the bank app on his phone. We sat in the front seat of the car in the parking lot of the diner, and for the next 47 minutes, we made phone calls. We were calm. We were almost frighteningly calm. I have read, in books and in articles, descriptions of the kind of calm that arrives in a person at a certain hour of a certain kind of day, and I had always assumed those descriptions were exaggerated. They are not exaggerated. The calm is real. The calm is the body's way of allowing a person to do something difficult without flinching, by removing the flinching equipment temporarily from the room. I called the venue first. I asked for the events manager. She came on the line cheerfully because she did not yet know what kind of phone call she was about to be on. I said, "This is Maureen Brennan. I am the signatory on the Brennan-Walsh contract for this afternoon's event at 3 p.m. I am calling to inform you that the contract is being cancelled, effective immediately, and that the final payment, which my bank is holding pending authorization, will not be released. The deposit is forfeit, per the cancellation clause. I am aware of the timing, and I am aware of the consequences." There was a long pause. The events manager, who is a 39-year-old woman named Brianna, whom I have since written a personal thank you note to for her professionalism, said, "Mrs. Brennan, Yes, I understand. I do want to confirm with you, given the timing." I said, "Brianna, I am quite certain. The event will not be paid for by me, and you may proceed accordingly. I am sorry to put you in this position. You have done nothing wrong." She paused again. She said, "I appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Brennan." She paused once more. She said, "Mrs. Brennan, may I ask, is everything—" I said, "Yes, Brianna, everything is fine. The bride has informed me half an hour ago that her parents are not welcome to attend the event her parents have funded. We are responding accordingly. Thank you for your professionalism. Please proceed." She said very quietly, "Yes, Mrs. Brennan." She paused once more. She said, "I'll need to inform the catering team and the bar. Their final draws are also pending your authorization." I said, "I will be calling them next, but please do inform them as well. Speed is to everyone's advantage at this point." She said, "Yes, Ma'am." She hung up. Walter called the caterer. I called the florist. Walter called the band. I called the photographer. Walter called the videographer. We went down the list. We did not raise our voices. We did not insult anyone. We told the truth in a single short sentence per vendor. The bride has informed her parents, less than an hour before the ceremony, that they are not welcome to attend. The parents, who are the sole signatories on the contracts and the sole funders of the event, are cancelling pending payments accordingly. Deposits are forfeit. We understand the timing. We are sorry to put each of you in this position. Please act according to your contractual rights. Every single one of them, without exception, said some version of, Mrs. Brennan, I am so sorry. The florist actually cried briefly on the phone and then apologized for crying, and I told her she had absolutely nothing to apologize for. The band leader, a man named Anthony, whom I had spoken to twice and liked enormously, said, Mrs. Brennan, you tell that girl from me, and then stopped himself and said instead, Mrs. Brennan, you have nothing to explain to me. We will not load in. I am so sorry for you. I said, Anthony, thank you. I am sorry to do this to you and your musicians on such short notice. He said, don't you be sorry to me, Mrs. Brennan. Don't you be sorry to anybody. 47 minutes after we had pulled into the parking lot of the diner I cannot name, every vendor for the wedding scheduled to start in 53 minutes had been informed that the event was financially defunct. The vendors who could halt setup did. The vendors who had already loaded in, like the florist, were given the choice of removing their installations or accepting the loss. Most of them, I learned later, packed up and left. The string ensemble, who were already on site, were paid by my last released installment. They were the only ones whose final draw I had cleared the previous Tuesday, because their amount was small, and so they did, in fact, play. They played for the empty rows of white chairs for about 18 minutes, until somebody told them to stop. While all of this was happening, my phone began to ring. The first call was from Cassidy. I let it ring through. The second call was from Cassidy. I let it ring through. The third call was from Cassidy. I let it ring through. The fourth call was from Trevor. I let it ring through. The fifth call was from a number I did not recognize, which I later learned was the wedding planner, Felicity, a woman I had paid $8,400 to over 6 months and had never met in person, because Cassidy had never invited me to meet her. I let it ring through. I turned the phone face down on the dashboard. Walter turned his phone face down on the dashboard. We looked at each other. He said, lunch. I said, lunch. We went into the diner. We sat in a booth by the window. The waitress, who was perhaps 50, with a small enamel pin on her apron that said her name Linda, asked us how we were doing. I almost laughed. Walter said, very politely, we're a little out of sorts today, Linda. Could we have 2 coffees and the Sunday special, please? Linda said, of course, hun. I'll get that right out. She did. We ate our roast beef. We did not talk about what had just happened. We talked instead about a small story Walter had read in the paper that morning, about a wild turkey that had taken to roosting on a particular roundabout in town and had been causing minor traffic disruption for 2 weeks. The wild turkey was, by mutual unspoken agreement, the only acceptable topic of conversation in the diner. We talked about the wild turkey for 55 minutes. We tipped Linda 30%. We got back in the car. The phone began to ring again. It had been ringing the entire time we had been inside. The screen showed 41 missed calls and 63 text messages. I scrolled. The calls were from Cassidy, Trevor, Felicity, Trevor's mother, my sister Eleanor, Cassidy's longtime best friend Hannah, the venue, the caterer, Cassidy again, Cassidy again, Cassidy again. The text messages were many of the same names, plus 3 numbers I did not recognize. I did not open any of them. I scrolled to the very most recent text, which was from Cassidy, time-stamped 4 minutes earlier. It said in capital letters, Mom, pick up! What have you done? You have ruined my life! I read the message twice. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected to feel the sharp internal twist of a mother who has been told she has ruined her child's life. The twist did not come. What came instead was something flatter and stranger and longer. A slow, level recognition. She has used that sentence on me before. She has used that sentence on me in some form or another since she was about 14 years old. Every time she has not gotten what she wanted, on a timeline she expected, from me. I had heard it the day I told her she could not have a car for her 16th birthday because we could not afford one. I had heard it the day I told her, gently, in her senior year of college, that we were not going to be able to fund a graduate program in addition to the undergraduate program we had already paid for. I had heard it the day I told her that her father and I would not be able to put a down payment on the house she and Trevor had been looking at 2 years ago. I had heard it in some form every time I had ever drawn a line in the sand with my daughter. And now I was hearing it again, in capital letters, on the screen of my phone, in the parking lot of a diner I cannot name, on the afternoon of a wedding I had paid for and not been invited to. The sentence had lost, somewhere in the last 90 minutes, the only power it had ever had over me. I turned the phone off. I did not silence it. I turned it off, the way you turn off a lamp at the end of a long evening. Walter turned his off as well. We drove home. I want to tell you about the rest of that evening, because I think it matters that you understand what we did when we got home and what we did not do. We pulled into our driveway at 4:12 in the afternoon. The ceremony, had it been happening on schedule, would have been over by then. The reception would have been just beginning. I do not, even now, know exactly what was happening at the country club at that hour. I know fragments. I know from a phone call I received 4 days later from a cousin I had not spoken to in 2 years that the 418 invited guests had been informed somewhere around 2:40 in the afternoon by a wedding planner with a clipboard that the event was being regrettably postponed due to circumstances outside our control, and that the guests should please return to their cars and they would be in touch about a future date. I know that Trevor's mother had a very public episode in the lobby of the stable block that involved a champagne glass and a wall. I know that Cassidy did not emerge from the bridal suite for over an hour. I know that Trevor's father attempted to retain his own attorney by telephone from the parking lot at 3:15 p.m. and was informed by that attorney that whatever he was hoping to do was not legally available to him under the circumstances. I know all of this because in the days that followed, the information made its way to me through 3 separate channels, none of which I had asked it from. I did not seek any of it out. I will not pretend I was not, in some small, ungenerous corner of myself, grateful to learn it. Walter and I sat in our kitchen at 4:12 in the afternoon. I made tea. He did not normally drink tea, but he drank it that day. We sat at the kitchen table and we did not say very much. After about an hour, I went upstairs to our bedroom. I took off the slate grey dress. I hung it in the closet. I do not, to this day, know what I will do with it. I have not worn it again. I took the small navy velvet pouch out of the inside pocket of my coat, and I sat on the edge of our bed, and I held it for a long time. And then I opened the pouch, and I took out the locket, and I put it on. I have worn it every day since. I do not intend ever to take it off. I came back downstairs. Walter looked up from the table. He said, "Maureen, what now?" I said, "I don't know yet, Walter, but not tonight." He said, "All right, sweetheart, not tonight." The phone stayed off until the following morning. We did not speak to anyone about anything that had happened. We did not turn on the television. We made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner at 7:30 p.m., the way we used to make grilled cheese sandwiches for ourselves on Friday nights when Cassidy was small and we had been too tired to cook a real dinner. We watched, of all things, a documentary about a small island off the coast of Maine where a group of researchers were studying puffins. The documentary had been in our streaming queue for 6 months and we had never gotten around to it. We watched all 90 minutes. Walter fell asleep on the couch during the last 15 minutes, the way he always falls asleep on the couch during the last 15 minutes of anything. I covered him with the soft throw blanket my mother-in-law had crocheted for us as a wedding present 41 years earlier. and I sat next to him on the couch in the half-dark, and I watched the credits of the Puffin documentary roll, and I thought, this is the last evening of one kind of life. Tomorrow is the first day of another. I did not know yet what the other life would be. I turned the phone on at 8:30 the next morning. There were 173 missed calls. There were 241 text messages. There were 11 voicemails. The voicemails ranged from Cassidy screaming, in the second one, that I was a vindictive, jealous, manipulative something I am not going to repeat in writing, to Cassidy crying very softly in the 8th one, asking me to please just pick up. Please just pick up, Mum. Please. I listened to all 11. I did not return any of them. I did not open any of the text messages. I made coffee for Walter and myself. I poured cereal. I sat at the kitchen table. I made one phone call. It was to my younger sister, Eleanor. Eleanor lives in a small town in eastern Pennsylvania. She is 59. She has been divorced for 19 years. She has 2 grown sons who adore her in the uncomplicated way that adult sons adore mothers who have never tried to control them. She was the only person in the world at that hour of that morning whose voice I was prepared to hear. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "Maureen, I have heard. Sit down." I said, "I am sitting down." She said, "Tell me, please." I told her. I told her all of it, plainly, in fewer sentences than it has taken me to tell it to you. I told her about the slate-grey dress and the locket, and the bridal suite, and the place card table, and the diner I cannot name, and the phone calls, and the Puffin documentary. When I was done, there was a long silence on the line. Then Eleanor said, "Maureen, sweetheart, I am driving to your house. I will be there at 3 p.m. Do not answer any phones. Do not open any door except for me. I love you. Goodbye." She drove 3 hours and 40 minutes that day to sit at my kitchen table with Walter and me for a single evening. And then she drove 3 hours and 40 minutes back. She did not stay over because she had to be at her own job the next morning. She did not, across the entire evening, say a single sentence about Cassidy. She said many sentences about other things, about a small dog she had been thinking about adopting, about a recipe for a kind of slow-braised cabbage I had never heard of, about her older son's new girlfriend, who she liked very much, about a book she was reading. She left at 9:30 p.m, and we walked her to her car, and at the car she hugged me for a long time, and she said into the side of my hair, "Maureen, you did exactly right. You did exactly right. Listen to me. You did exactly right." I needed to hear it from someone who had known me since I was 3 years old. I do not think I would have believed it from anyone else. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, the one who had drafted our wills and our trusts. A different one. A woman my colleague at the school had used during her divorce 11 years earlier, who specialised in family financial matters and who I had met once at a retirement dinner and had liked. Her name was Diane Park. I called her office at 9 in the morning, and she called me back personally at 10:15. She listened to the entire story. She asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she said, "Mrs. Brennan, I would like to see you and Mr. Brennan in my office this Thursday at 2 p.m. We have several matters to discuss. Some of them are urgent. Most of them are not. None of them require you to speak to your daughter before we meet." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Mrs. Brennan, may I ask, how are you sleeping?" I said, "Surprisingly well." She paused. She said, "Good. I am going to give you a piece of advice you did not ask for, and you may ignore it. If your sleep changes, please tell me. It often changes about 10 days in. We can talk about it then." I said, "All right, Diane. Thank you." I added her name to my phone. On Thursday, Walter and I went to Diane Park's office. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 10 minutes. Across those 2 hours and 10 minutes, Diane did 3 things. First, she walked us through the existing will and trust documents that had been drafted 9 years earlier, in which Cassidy was named as the sole beneficiary of our combined estate. She did not at any point tell us what to do about those documents. She simply read them aloud, line by line, in their entirety, and asked us at the end whether we still wished them to remain as drafted. Walter and I looked at each other across the small mahogany conference table. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Finally, Walter said, "Diane, we would like to revise them." Diane said, "All right, we will begin that process today. There is no rush. Decisions made in the first 6 weeks after an event of this nature tend to be undone in the second 6 weeks. I will draft 3 different versions of revised documents for you to consider, and we will meet again in 8 weeks and then again in 16 weeks before we finalize anything. There is no situation in which Cassidy can access anything before that timeline is complete, regardless of what she says or does. I want you to know that. You are not in a hurry. You may take as long as you want." Walter exhaled. Until that moment, I had not realized he had been holding his breath about the will. Second, Diane walked us through the financial structure of our retirement and household accounts. She identified 2 places where Cassidy had limited authorized user access. One was a credit card we had set up when she was in college, which she had continued to use occasionally as an emergency card across the years. And the other was a small money market account I had opened years ago to handle her wedding deposit transfers and had never quite gotten around to closing. Diane recommended we remove her access from both. We did, the same afternoon. We did not feel cruel. We felt practical. There is a difference, and I want you to understand the difference, because I think people who have not been in our position assume that the absence of cruelty in a parent's response to a child's behavior must mean the absence of love. That is not what it means. It means the absence of cruelty. Love can continue without funding the structures that have been used to harm you. It turns out it can anyway. I had not known that before. Third, Diane asked us a question that I have thought about every day since. She asked, "What is your goal in the relationship with your daughter going forward?" Walter said, "I don't know yet, Diane. Honestly, I don't know yet." I said, "Diane, I want to be careful with how I answer that. May I think about it?" Diane said, "Of course. The question does not need an answer today. The question will need an answer eventually. The reason I'm asking it now is because every decision we make about the legal and financial structures from this point forward will be different, depending on the answer. If your goal is reconciliation on healthier terms, the documents look one way. If your goal is permanent estrangement with continued legal protection, the documents look another way. If your goal is something in between, which is the most common answer, the documents are drafted to leave room for movement in both directions. I am not asking you to decide today. I am asking you to start carrying the question. I have carried the question every day since. I have not yet fully answered it. We left Diane's office at 4:30 p.m. We picked up Thai food on the way home. We sat in the kitchen and we ate it out of the cardboard containers, the way we had eaten Thai food in our first apartment in our second year of marriage, when we could not afford plates. We did not talk much. After we ate, Walter said, "Maureen," I said. "Yes, Walter." He said, "I want to take that trip we never took." I said, "Which one?" He said, "The driving trip. Through New Mexico, the one we put off for 9 years. I said, "When?" He said, 3 weeks. I'll book it tomorrow. I said, "All right, Walter." He booked it the next morning. We left 3 weeks later. We drove from our house to Santa Fe by way of 2 small towns in eastern Oklahoma I had never heard of, in 9 days. We did not turn our phones off because we are responsible adults with a few elderly relatives, but we did not look at them more than once a day. I read a novel in the front seat. Walter listened to a podcast about the Civil War. We took photographs of small, unremarkable things. We slept in motels that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner. We came home 11 days later, sunburned and rested. In the months that followed, Cassidy attempted contact in waves. The first wave was anger. Long, furious text messages, sometimes 30 in a row, sometimes accompanied by accusations she had clearly workshopped with someone, possibly Trevor, possibly Trevor's mother, possibly her best friend Hannah. I read the first few. I stopped reading after the fourth one. I did not block her. I let the messages come into the phone and sit there. The second wave, perhaps 6 weeks in, was negotiation. Messages explaining her side. Messages framing the wedding day incident as a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. Messages naming people on Trevor's side as responsible for the pressure she had been under. The negotiation phase lasted about a month. I did not respond. The third wave, around the 4-month mark, was guilt. Long messages about how hard she was finding the silence. Long messages about how much she had loved her father. Long messages about the loss of family. The guilt phase lasted perhaps 6 weeks. I did not respond. The fourth wave, around the 6-month mark, was, finally, an actual letter. A handwritten one. 3 pages. It arrived in our mailbox in a plain white envelope with her return address in the upper left corner. The handwriting was unsteady in places. I sat at the kitchen table with the unopened letter for about an hour before I opened it. I am not going to reproduce the letter for you here. It was a private thing, between her and me, and I am going to honour that, even now. I will tell you only that the letter was the first piece of communication from her in the entire 6 months, in which she did not at any point use the words but or however. Every previous message had been some version of, "I'm sorry, but you have to understand," or, "I know I was wrong, however." The letter contained neither word. It said, instead, that she had been in therapy for 4 months, that she had begun to understand the shape of what she had been doing to us, not just on the day of the wedding, but for many years before, that she did not expect to be forgiven, that she did not expect to be welcomed back, that she did not expect anything at all, and that she was writing the letter not because she wanted a response, but because she felt that I deserved, at minimum, an honest accounting of what she had come to understand. She wrote that her marriage to Trevor was over. The wedding, of course, had never happened. The legal marriage, which had been planned to follow on the Monday after the ceremony, in a small civil arrangement at the courthouse, had also never happened, because by the Monday after the ceremony, Trevor's family had begun a kind of slow-motion withdrawal from her that had become, by the end of the 2nd month, total. She wrote that she had moved out of the apartment she had been sharing with him. She wrote that she had returned to her own apartment, a small 1-bedroom in a neighbourhood I did not know, where she was paying her own rent and her own bills for the first time since she had been 23. She wrote that her marketing job was going well, which she was grateful for, because she did not have anyone supporting her financially now and had no intention of asking anyone to. She wrote that her therapist had said, in one of their early sessions, "The first sign that you are beginning to do real work, Cassidy, is when you stop trying to make this story about anyone else." She wrote that she was trying very hard to take that sentence seriously. She wrote at the end, "Mum, I love you. I have always loved you. I did not act like it for a great many years. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am writing because I needed to say it in a place where you could not interrupt me, because I have not earned the right to be interrupted by you. Whatever you choose to do with this letter is your choice. Yours, Cassidy." She did not sign it love. She signed it yours. I noticed that. I think she had meant me to notice that. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter for a long time. After a while, Walter came in. He looked at me. He looked at the letter. He said, "Cassidy?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Walter, I am going to write back to her. Not yet, but eventually. I want you to know that. He said, "All right, sweetheart. I want to read what she wrote when you're ready to show it to me." I said, "I'll show it to you tonight." I showed it to him that night. He read it slowly. He read it twice. He set it down. He said, "She wrote what she should have written, Maureen. I want to be careful about that. The letter is not, by itself, enough, but it is the first thing she has ever written that is not, fundamentally, about her. We will see what she does next." I said, "Yes, Walter, that is exactly right." We did not write back yet. We wrote back about 10 weeks later. The reply was 4 sentences. Walter signed it with me. The reply said, "Cassidy, we received your letter. We read it. We are not yet ready to talk, but we want you to know that we are reading what you write. Mum and Dad." We mailed it on a Tuesday. She wrote back 2 weeks later, a shorter letter this time, about her life, a class she had begun taking on Saturday mornings, a small dog she had adopted from a shelter, a friend at work she had begun spending time with. She did not ask for anything. She did not push. We wrote back, 4 sentences again, 2 weeks after that. A correspondence developed, 3 or 4 letters apiece, across the following 6 months. The letters got slightly longer. They were always, on her side, careful. There was a discipline in her writing that had not been there before, a kind of measured restraint, as if she had begun to understand that words have weight and that throwing them around carelessly is what had cost her, in the end, the only people who had ever been on her side, without asking what was in it for them. Almost exactly 14 months after the day of the wedding, Cassidy and I had lunch, just the 2 of us. Walter offered to come. I told him I wanted to do it alone first. We met at a small restaurant downtown that neither of us had been to before, on neutral ground, on a Sunday at noon. I arrived first. I sat at a corner table by the window. She came in 5 minutes later. She was thinner than the last time I had seen her, in the corridor of the stable block. Her hair was shorter, ordinary. She was wearing jeans and a plain navy sweater, and small silver earrings. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there the year before. She looked, for the first time in my life, like a 34-year-old woman who had lived a year that had cost her something. She stopped at the table. She did not sit down right away. She said, "Mum, thank you for coming." I said, "Sit down, Cassidy." She sat down. We ordered. We ate. We talked for 2.5 hours. We did not talk about the wedding. We did not talk about Trevor. We did not talk about money. We talked about ordinary, careful, neutral things. Her work, her dog, a book I had been reading, a small houseplant Walter had become obsessed with cultivating. At the end of the meal, she paid for both our lunches. She insisted. She said, "Mom, please, let me." I let her. As we walked out of the restaurant onto the sidewalk, she stopped, and she turned to me and she said, "Mom, I am not asking for anything. I know that. I want you to know I know it. I'm just glad you came." I said, "Cassidy, I came because I love you. I am not yet what I used to be to you. I do not know if I will ever be again. But I came." She nodded. Her eyes filled. She did not cry. She nodded once more. I hugged her briefly, the way you hug someone you have not hugged in a long time and are not certain you have permission to hug. She let me. We did not stand there long. We let each other go. I walked to my car. She walked to hers. We drove home in different directions. That was 2 years and 4 months ago. Cassidy is 36 now. She lives in the same 1-bedroom apartment she moved into after Trevor. She has been with the same marketing firm for almost 4 years. She has a steady, quiet boyfriend who she has been seeing for 14 months. A man called Daniel, whom Walter and I have met twice, and who is gentle and slow-spoken and treats her like a person and not a logistical project. She has not asked us for money. She has not, to my knowledge, asked anyone for money. She comes to our house for dinner about once every 6 weeks. She and Walter have a particular conversation about the wild turkey on the roundabout in town that has somehow become a family running joke. The turkey is, apparently, still there. She has not, in 2 years and 4 months, mentioned the day of the wedding to me, even once. She has not, in 2 years and 4 months, asked us to forgive her. I think she understands that asking would be a way of closing the question, and that the question is not the kind that can be closed. I am grateful every time she does not ask that she has learned that much. The locket sits every day against my collarbone. I have not, in 2 years and 4 months, taken it off except to clean it. I do not know what I will do with it. I have not yet decided whether I will ever give it to her, or whether, when I die, it will simply be in a small navy velvet pouch in a drawer in my closet, and Walter or one of my nieces will find it, and the question of what to do with it will pass to them. I think about it sometimes. I have not decided. There is no rush. I want to tell you one more thing before I stop. 6 months after our first lunch, Cassidy and Walter and I had Christmas dinner together. Just the 3 of us, at our house. She arrived at 4 in the afternoon on a cold, grey December day with a small wrapped package in her hand. She set the package on the entryway table without making a thing of it. We ate, we talked, we watched a movie. At 9 in the evening, as she was leaving, she stopped at the entryway table. She picked up the package. She handed it to me. She said, "Mom, this is for you. I am not asking you to wear it. I am not asking you to keep it. I just wanted you to have it." I opened the package slowly, with Walter beside me. Inside was a small, framed pencil drawing. It was a drawing of me. A pencil drawing of me at perhaps 38 years old, sitting at our old kitchen table in the house we had lived in when she was small, reading a book, with my hand under my chin. She had drawn it herself. She had been working on it, on and off, for 9 months. She had taken art classes at a community centre on Saturday mornings, the ones she had mentioned in her letters, specifically so that she could learn to draw well enough to make me this. The drawing was not perfect. The proportions of my hand were slightly wrong. The light on my face was good, though. She had gotten the light. She had drawn me, the look of me, the small, distracted absorption of me reading. I held the drawing for a long time. I could not speak for a long time. Walter, beside me, finally said, quietly, "Cassidy, sweetheart, this is beautiful." She said, "Dad, I have spent 2.5 years trying to figure out how to apologize without apologizing, because the words have been used up. So I had to find another way. This is the only one I had." She did not cry. I did. Walter did. She did not. She nodded once. She hugged us both. She drove home. The drawing is hanging in our front hall, where I see it every time I leave the house and every time I come home. I see myself at 38, in our old kitchen, with my hand under my chin, reading a book I cannot remember now. I see the careful, patient work of a daughter who finally learned, very late, that love is not a sentence you say. It is a thing you make, slowly, with your hands, over time, without expecting to be paid for it. She is, I think, learning it. I do not know whether she will keep learning it. I do not know whether we will continue to grow back together, or whether we will, at some point, hit something neither of us can survive. I do not know what happens next. None of us do. What I know is this: the day of the wedding, in the parking lot of a diner I cannot name, I made the hardest decision of my adult life. I did not make it out of cruelty. I did not make it out of revenge. I made it because, after 33 years of being a person whose love had been treated as a renewable, unlimited, free resource, I finally, for the first time, did the simple arithmetic. The arithmetic was this: If our love had been free and unlimited, then it had been worth nothing. Because nothing that is free and unlimited has any market value. The only way our love was ever going to be worth anything to our daughter was if we put a price on it. The price was not money. The price was respect. The price was being treated like people, not like the source. We had been treated like the source for 33 years, and on the day of the wedding, we said no. We did not say it angrily. We did not say it loudly. We said it by closing one specific door and waiting to see whether anyone, on the other side of that door, would eventually knock with empty hands and ask, quietly, to come back in. Cassidy knocked. She knocked with empty hands. She is still, 3 years later, knocking, every 6 weeks, on a Sunday afternoon, with empty hands. I am still letting her in. We are still figuring out what kind of room we are sitting in now. The room is not the same room it used to be. It is, I think, a better one. It is smaller. It is quieter. It is more honest. The locket sits against my collarbone as I write this. Walter is in the next room reading the paper. Outside the window, it is the kind of late afternoon in early autumn that always makes me think of my mother. I am 66 years old. I am, at this hour of this day, the calmest I have been in many years. I do not regret the phone calls in the parking lot. I do not regret the venue, the catering, the band, the flowers. I do not regret a single one of those 47 minutes. I would do every one of them again. I would do them slower, if anything. I would take my time. If you are listening to this story and you are wondering whether love and the refusal to be exploited are in conflict with each other, they are not. They are the same thing. They have always been the same thing. The hardest lesson of being a mother for 33 years was not learning to give. Giving was the easy part. The hardest lesson was learning that the thing I had been giving, my time, my attention, my body, my retirement account, my approval, my forgiveness, was, in the end, a thing, and that the only way it could ever be received as love, instead of as resource, was if I was eventually willing to stop giving it. I was willing, on a Saturday afternoon in early September, in a stable block at a country club 30 miles north of my town, to stop. I stopped. The world did not end. My daughter did not die. My marriage did not break. The sun went down that night and came up the next morning, and I made coffee in my own kitchen, and I learnt, very slowly, that I had been allowed to draw a line in my own life all along, and that nobody had been able to do it for me, because nobody else had ever been in a position to. It was always mine to draw. I had simply not known it. I know it now. I am 66. I know it now. And I am going to keep knowing it every day for whatever time I have left.